nobody knows what it's like to die until you feel like you're about to die.
Right.
And even though that wasn't the case that I was about to die, it still felt like that, like a near-death type of experience.
What is up, fam? This is the Big Ray's Garage Grind, brought to you by the Mindful Therapy Group, and I am your host, Big Ray. And today I'm super excited because little does Tyler know, but from the very beginning of this podcast and this effort, he was like the number one dude on my list to get into the room. And I know we didn't have time. We wanted to kick off the season with Tyler, but the way the season is going and how busy you guys are, wasn't able to do that. But we are super excited today to be able to talk to the one and the only Mr. Tyler Lockett. And so of you guys that don't know about Tyler, Tyler's been a first-team All-Pro. He is, like, if you include, like, the playoffs, he has over 8,000 yards receiving and 60, I think, touchdowns. For the Seahawks, he's been to the Pro Bowl. He's a team captain. He's just like a Mr. Everything dude, a Renaissance kind of guy to me. Real estate broker or agent,
agent.
One of the two. And so just excited to have you here, man. And just to kind of get things started just a little bit, you know, we talked a little bit about your football endeavors and things. You're not the biggest dude in the world.
Yeah.
What motivated you and what drove you to football? For guys your size?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, my family was a sports family, so I was always introduced to sports at a young age, played basketball, football, baseball, and so, like, playing multiple sports helps you to be able to, like, play football really great because when you're playing basketball, you're working on your quickness, you're working on understanding the plays, how it's supposed to develop, people getting open. You play baseball, it's more of the hand-eye coordination. And even when you do stuff like run track, I mean, it's helping you build up your speed. And so, you know, being born in a sports family, having an opportunity to understand that my best chance was to go in football through the scholarships and stuff that we get for full rides. And then after that, it's just mastering your craft. My faith always drove me to want to be great and glorify God in everything that I do. And so just having that opportunity to play football and try to master my craft has helped me get to this spot as well.
I feel you. And then also, you know, we always, I wish we could find a different way to say it, but we always say, man, Tyler Lockett's the most underrated receiver in the league. And it almost seems like even saying it that way it like kind of pushes you down.
Yeah.
It's like, but what is it, why do you think that other receivers get more attention than you get? Like around here, we know who you are and what you do and what you bring to it, the toe taps and, you know, the ability to get open when people are scrambling, you just find an opening spot, all these different kinds of things. But why do you think that maybe you don't get some of the, I don't want to say respect, but recognition, I guess?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it, too, depends on the market that you're in. You know, because we're out on the West Coast, there's not a lot of people across the world that really get to watch us play. And so when you're looking at the teams that's in the Midwest or the South or the East, a lot of people are more in tune with being able to watch them. Then you're talking about, like, the marketing of teams. You're talking about, I think even when you look at what you want a receiver to be, people don't really, you know, look at me as the first candidate or even probably the top 5 candidates. It's just people like to look at a receiver as, you know, speed. And so then they quickly find somebody for speed. They look at somebody for height. They say, this is what it has to be. They find somebody that's like creative and savvy, and they say, well, this is what a receiver's supposed to look like. But I think for me, I'm just like a football player. And because of that, it's like, well, there's not one thing that they could pinpoint that says this is what makes him a top-notch receiver. It's just, okay, he does everything right.
Right.
He's in the right spot. Okay, he makes the catch. Okay, he gets the yards. But there's nothing like electrifying about him to say he should be in this category as other receivers. And so I also think, too, like, we have so many great receivers here. We do a great job trying to get everybody involved. And I think sometimes when you look at how other teams are, players get way more opportunities to be featured and stuff like that, which allows them to have that chance early on in their career to be that guy.
Yeah, well, I will tell you, dude, like, I've had the opportunity with this podcast. I interviewed Doug Baldwin, Cliff Averill, KJ Wright, and now interviewing you. And I can't pick 4 other Seahawks that I would rather interview. You know what I'm saying? You guys all bring such uniqueness to this topic and also to the team, and you're so involved in the community. I think those are great things. But I know that we don't have you for a long time, so I want to kind of jump right into it a little bit. This podcast was created to, one, tell my story around my mental health journey. Two, was to kind of debunk the idea of the stigma around mental health for athletes and for black dudes specifically. And then three was to kind of show the listeners and the viewers the humanity of who we are. Because so many times we're just a helmet and pads.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? With these caricatures of gladiators that don't bleed, don't cry, don't have emotions, all those kinds of things. And so what I'd like to do is, I know that, I think it was last year or a couple years ago where you posted that 2 out of the 7 years that you played in the league, that you were playing through some type of trauma and that you were dealing with depression and anxiety. If you're willing to be vulnerable enough, can you walk us through those two situations and kind of what was going on during those times?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think each ones are different. There was one time, I think going into the end of my 3rd year, I had my first panic attack, never knew what it was. And so that stuff makes you feel like you're going to die right off the top, So you have a panic attack. They really say that there's no difference in figuring out what's a panic attack and what's a heart attack. And just having to go through that whole experience kind of messes you up because you go to the hospital, the doctors are trying to figure out what's going on. They're asking if you took cocaine and,
oh my God.
All this stuff, and you're saying no, and they're like, well, are you sure? Maybe you did and you didn't know. So it makes you start freaking out even more, making the experience even worse. And so, then learning and understanding how to maneuver through that and work through that, because sometimes, nobody knows what it's like to die until you feel like you're about to die.
Right.
And even though that wasn't the case that I was about to die, it still felt like that, like a near-death type of experience. And so then it starts to mess with you mentally. You start to think that it's going to happen again over and over. You start to slowly, you start to add in that fear and trauma into other circumstances that's going on in life that didn't have anything to do with it, but now you're just, if you can't control it early, you start allowing it to creep into other areas to where now it becomes something that's uncontrollable and hard to be able to maintain. And so, I had to go through that, play through that, and I think it's a daily battle that you had to learn and had to, learn how to overcome and go through things that you go through, within your circle or your families or, whatever the case is. You got to learn how to be able to overcome that. But sometimes, like I said, it takes days, it takes months, it takes years, it takes talking to other people. But, you also learn how to be great in every situation. If you can only be great when you have a sound mind, then I feel like you're missing the point of learning how you can still be able to operate and be great when you have, not so much of a sound mind.
Right.
You might be going through it mentally, but if you feel like you can only be free when you're not going through it mentally, then you're always going to struggle when you go through it mentally. So sometimes you got to be how we are our worst critic, you also got to be your biggest supporter.
Right.
And the more and more that you realize oh, nothing's happening, the more and more that you take its power away.
I feel you. So the panic attack thing I can identify with because I've dealt with the same thing, but it can be different for everyone, for different people. So for me, I couldn't get myself to go out the door. So I would look at the doorknob, and then for some reason, my heart would start racing. I couldn't breathe. My chest would get super tight, and I could not get. I blocked 300-pound dudes in my life, for a career, and I couldn't turn the knob on a 1-pound doorknob.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So for you, what did it feel like? Was it the same type of elements, like tightness of the chest, breathing,
Well, yeah, it was the same stuff. I think, it gives you the social anxiety because then you don't want to go outside because you think it's going to happen again in front of everybody. But, then you start learning some of the things that kind of levels everything down where you can't die from a panic attack.
Right.
And so then all of a sudden you start being like, okay, well, no matter what happens,
I'm going to be okay.
I'm still going to be okay.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then you start understanding that when your ears and stuff starts ringing, it's more of an alarm clock. So a panic attack is more of an alarm clock than like a death date.
I got you.
And so you start being like, okay, all it's telling me is like, hey, you got to find a different way to cope. Hey, you got to find a different way to think. You got to find a different way to respond. And so once you start understanding that, the power of the panic attacks and the power of the anxiety start to go away a little bit, because you start realizing that it can't kill me.
Right.
But it can hold you back.
Right.
Because the more and more that you choose not to deal with it or choose to work through it in a positive like aspect, the more and more it's going to control you and seep in to all the other stuff that's going on in your life.
So you also spoke about, by the way, you said during both of those years you had like great years. I think, was that one of the years you had like 100 receptions?
Yeah, I think so.
I think it's what. And then, but also you said that you had some depression and anxiety. Like, what did the depression feel like? I know that the panic attack is the one thing, but did that drive you to the depression? And then what was the depression like?
Yeah, well, I mean, it drives you through a depression because mentally, when you're mentally strong, that's like one of the biggest like pros that you can have is like a mental strong mind. But then all of a sudden, whenever you become traumatic or you start dealing with stuff, that strong-mindedness starts to take over in a not so good way, because now you start to over-visualize things and overthink things, and then you start feeling like this is going to be like the new norm and you're going to deal with this for the rest of your life. And then the stuff that used to be fun isn't really fun anymore because it's changing your way of thinking because of what you're dealing with. So then you slowly start to deal with certain depressions because you just start replaying things in your head over and over and over and over to where it's like you can't really, think about anything else or talk about anything else. So, I think, the biggest thing was like, being able to talk about it, but also being able to make that decision that you were going to learn how to move on while still having to learn how to deal with certain stuff. So, one day you try not to talk about it as much, and then the second day you try not to talk about it as much, and then the third day and the fourth day you keep doing it, and before you know it, you start stacking days to where it doesn't have that same power over you as it did from day one. And there's some setbacks in those days, but then there's also, let me do better than that last day. And as you start doing that, you start realizing you can live without some of that stuff that you were carrying.
Right.
And once you can live without carrying that stuff, then you learn how to be free again.
Yeah. Well, and being free and learning those things, did you do therapy? Did you speak with a therapist, or was this kind of like your own remedies that you kind of came up with?
Well, there was times I did talk to therapists, I talked to families, I talked to friends, talked to people who could hear me out, who could understand it, who would just listen. I'm not people who always tried to help, but I had people who were good at being able to give that advice to be able to help. And then I think it got to a point where, when you start realizing how to control your anxieties, the biggest thing is understanding yourself too, because there was times where I could talk to people, but then you feel like you always need to talk to somebody. And so you have to get to a place where you're not using people as a crutch.
Right.
And so like for me, if I felt like therapy or like a counselor or a friend started to become a crutch for me, because if I was talking to them, I felt better, but then when I was maneuvering throughout my day, I felt bad, then it was like, okay, now you need to sit with yourself and learn how to be a counselor with yourself and learn how to be therapeutic within yourself. Because at the end of the day, if that person doesn't answer the phone, you can't just be like, okay, well now anxiety's going to win or depression's going to win. So as you slowly started to build up that confidence and being able to help yourself get out of it and being able to be more positive, you start learning that, anxiety and gratitude don't go together. So like if there's more gratitude in your life, there's less anxieties.
Right.
When you're more thankful, there's less anxieties. But when you become more worrisome and more fearful, there becomes less thankfulness and less gratitude. And so that's anxiety and depression starts to take over more.
So the last episode, I talked about this list that I used to make, and every morning I would write down all that stuff, all the things I was grateful for, all the different blessings, all the different people that I love and that I know that love me, because I needed that to reprogram the thoughts I was telling myself. So for you, was that just a matter of, like, I had to physically do that. I did it twice a day, every morning as soon as I woke up, and every night before I went to bed. I hand wrote the list every single time. And but for you, like, it's different. Was it just something you thought about, or something you wrote down, or like you just kind of spent time by yourself, just meditation? Like, what was that?
Well, I mean, you had meditations, you had floating that you could be able to do. There was a guy who used to work here that I would talk to, and we found more different creative ways to be able to to battle it. And so you would do stuff like, okay, if you like basketball, it's you versus anxiety. And there's times where, you're winning, you're scoring layups, shooting threes, doing jumpers, whatever. Then there's times where anxiety gets on a fast break and the momentum is starting to swing the other way. And sometimes you just got to call timeout. And so when you call timeout, it's like you start to okay, just like you got a minute, you be like, all right, cool.
Yeah.
Like, okay, it had me, but now I know how I can hold the ball. There's no shot clock to this game.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to just hold it and run some plays until I get back in control. So there was different ways that you could be creative with doing it. There was other times where I would sit there and it was like, yeah, it's bothering me, but then you sit there and you say, okay, but I just ran a route and I was okay. That was a victory. I just talked and that was a victory.
Right.
I just thought in my head and that was a victory. And the more you start counting the victories that you did each second and each minute, I might not listen to somebody I might listen to you for 30 minutes
Right.
and I'm freaking out 10 of those minutes, but I'm counting those victories for the 20 minutes I didn't.
Right.
And so like you did, the more and more I started counting the victories in my life, like, well, I woke up and it didn't bother me.
Right.
I got in the car, it didn't bother me. So it's like, well, it didn't bother me 20 other times, but it bothered me this one time.
Right.
The power starts to slowly go away.
Yeah, I love the visuals that you're painting there, especially of the basketball one, because that's exactly how I had to think about it. Like, there was one day, so I don't know if you've heard the full story, but about a year or so ago, I just had an unbelievable meltdown. And through the NFL, I went to this place called After the Impact in Manchester, Michigan, right outside of Ann Arbor, and I was there for 32 days. There were 6 former football players there, and they brought every type of therapy you can think about to the house. So it was physical therapy, cognitive therapy, recreational therapy, like music therapy, all these different things. And so one day, I wasn't able to get out. I slept in. I couldn't get myself out of the bed. And because I did that, I missed all these appointments and things I had the first half of the day. But then I got up the second half of the day. I got my exercise in. I rescheduled all those appointments. But in my mind, I had still lost the day because that half day got me. And so when I went to the therapy, the therapist did exactly what you said. It was like, hey, but Ray, look at all the little wins you got. You got up. You got your workout in. You rescheduled all of your appointments and things like that. So you got to count the small victories,
Right?
Because the small victories always come before the big ones. Like, even if you look at it from a sports one, like, you have to win all the individual games to get to the Super Bowl. You know what I'm saying? Within those games, you got to win your one-on-one combination. Route, you know what I'm saying? You got to win the practice. You got to win your rep against your dude. So it's always the little wins that come before the big wins.
Yep.
And so that's what I try to remind myself of, because some days I can go I just lost the day.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But it's but man, I got up. I did well with my breakfast. I'm trying to lose weight. I got to the gym. I saw my kids, all these different things. So that list of gratitude and those small victories really, really matter. I know that the Seahawks started a program around your mental health and what's available for the players here. One, what does that look like, and how has that been? And then 2, if we can just finish up with, why did you choose to be out front about this, and then how has the locker room received it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's great to know that the Seahawks are, one of the teams that's in the forefront of wanting to make a difference, because in this business that we play, as you know, it's you taking food off another man's plate.
Mm-hmm.
The way that they put it is not very good therapeutic, for our mentals, where you're coming onto a team and people might not help you. People are hoping that you fail. If a guy is number 2 or number 3, or they're a receiver that's not playing, the only way that they get a chance to play is for your downfall. Mm-hmm. So now you're hoping for somebody to not do good, because then you get a chance to play. And so all that stuff takes out the positivity because you need people to fail in order for you to get your shot. So for them to be able to do that, for them to be able to send out, counselors and stuff like that to talk to me, even when I was dealing with it, I would go to practice a little bit later, miss the first 20, 30 minutes of practice because they let me go talk to a counselor. And so doing that allows you to understand that it is more than football and that they do have people in place to be able to help you, to be able to talk to you about it. And then the reason why I spoke, more about it was just because if this is something that you're dealing with in silence, and this is something that there's probably a lot of people in the world that's dealing with it in silence. And the only reason I knew what it was is because I had I was blessed to be in this position for people to tell me about it and for people to talk to me about it. I didn't have to pay for therapy. I didn't have to pay for counseling because the team already had that.
Right.
And so there's some people who don't have the money to do that because, if we're being honest, mental health is becoming a bigger topic, but there's more people that's counselors are starting to charge to overprice it just because, it's becoming
because the demand
more.
Is high.
Yeah. And so to give people that free, knowledge and being able to understand mental health and different ways to be able to battle it, to make it more of a fun type of competition rather than life and death type of competition. Right. When you change the narrative and you change the game, because you can always change the game in your head. And once you change it, then you just got to fight for your life to be able to continue to remind yourself about, I changed the game to this. Now we're going to have fun. We're just going to do a shootout. We're going to do a shoot around. We're going to play knockout. We're going to do around the world. We're going to do different stuff like that because whatever I can do to count those small victories, I might be worrying and craving for this big victory, but if the big victory doesn't happen, it's okay because now I'm starting to fall in love with the small victories that will be enough even if the one thing that I really want, the big victory, never happens.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on, Tyler. I hope that we can get you back on because there's so much more that I want to talk to you about. I know you have to get going. Really, like I said, I really do appreciate you being on. Want to remind you guys again that Big Ray's Garage Grind Mental Health Edition is presented by the Mindful Therapy Group. The Mindful Therapy Group, based in the Pacific Northwest, is a diverse group of qualified mental health providers offering both in-person and virtual care. Whether it's talk therapy or medication management, you can book your first visit within 1 week. Visit mindfultherapygroup.com to start your journey to better mental health today. And like we always say at the end of our show here, if you're experiencing a medical or a mental health crisis, please reach out to your medical providers for assistance and guidance. It's okay to not be okay. And number 3, if you need help and you ask for help, you're operating from a position of power. This has been Big Ray's Garage Grind Mental Health Edition. Peace, and I'm out.